Just before, even before the dust could settle on that controversial 250,000 shillings house allowance for members of parliament in Kenya, there is another allowance. They are calling it the domestic subsistence facilitation. Now, the new scheme entitles a member of parliament to between 18,000 shillings and 24,000 shillings per day, per night. That is for every night your MP spends in Nairobi to attend parliamentary sessions. So that is between Tuesday and Thursday. Between Monday and Thursday, so that's 4 days a week. That could mean a member of parliament could be earning 96,000 shillings per night for what is being dubbed as night allowance. Despite the fact that many of them have homes in Nairobi, this has continued to raise a lot of reactions from Kenyans. Dismas, you were on their side when we were talking about the 250,000 shilling house allowance, saying that they need it. What do you think about this?
I'm still on their side, but let's get the perspective that we used to have 212 members of the National Assembly. Now we have 416.
Yes.
And I don't know how many MCAs we have, because many of them come in through nominations, so maybe it's about 1,200.
Elected,
yeah.
plus.
So there are many. You don't even know exactly what they do. Now, when President Kibaki took office, that's when we saw their salaries increasing and their perks, because the economy was growing. And the members of the National Assembly participated in the growth of the economy. There was a bit of catalytic reaction. When you had when Paul Muite, Kiraitu Murungi, and James Orengo, when they were really MPs, when they knew their core business was to create laws to facilitate economic growth. But right now, all of them play to the gallery. I don't know whether they make any contributions either in the National Assembly or in the counties they are running. And in my view, we shouldn't be afraid of discussing this. But I don't know who comes up with this branding. You know, when you say night allowance, it suggests things happening in nocturnal night, very funny things. But in principle, I don't have a problem with it. The problem is the amount of money. Because now the National Assembly and
You've
Senate...
just spoken about the ballooning wage bill, and the fact that a third of that goes to government employees. But you're saying you don't have a problem with MPs earning around 384,000 shillings per month in addition to their salaries, which are roughly 700,000 shillings for spending nights in Nairobi.
No, I'm not finished my contribution. If they're going to get this night allowance, and of course they need to get a better branding. I don't know why it's night allowance. They need to get a better name. But if they're going to get a night allowance, then let it be a rational or a logical figure. The figure they're proposing, 96,000 per month, is obscene.
Per week?
Yeah, per week. That's obscene. And then if they're going to get the night allowance, then they're not going to get house allowance. You cannot give him house allowance to stay in Nairobi, and then you pay him an additional amount of money for coming to Nairobi. Those two do not exist.
All right.
But on the issue of mortgages, it doesn't matter. You could be an MP from Kisii, you're given a mortgage, and you buy a house in Elgeyo Marakwet or in Turkana. It doesn't matter. The mortgage does not come in because it's a loan. But the two cannot exist at the same time. You can't have a night allowance and you can't have a house allowance.
Roslyn, let me come to you, Roslyn.
But more important, before I lose that point, this thing, they need to be pegged on key performance indicators, because we don't see any tangible outcome in the National Assembly. Recently, there was a voodoo poll which indicated that a number of MPs were very active, but the ones who were inactive said they're happy to do tanga-tanga politics or kieleweke politics every day. But the raison d'etre of an MP is to go to the National Assembly, come up with good policies. I mean, we would even pay them 100,000 per night if our economy is, if they grow our GDP to 123 billion USD. We can pay them 100,000, but you can't pay them 100,000 or 96,000 per week for doing absolutely nothing.
But who keeps saying they deserve?
No. They deserve good pay, but it must be performance related.
All right. Roslyn, you cover Parliament a lot.
Yes.
Was this night allowance, as you're calling it, domestic subsistence facilitation, was it like an alternative just in case the 250,000 shilling house allowance gets a lot of beating from the public?
Actually, you've just said it right. You remember after the court ruled that the house allowance was illegal, and I think the case is still in court. the MPs had a kamukunchi that brought together the two houses of parliament. And some of the measures that they came up with, which they were not able to tell the media because they say the media has always been out there to bash them, was to have a safety net, a fallback, so that in the event that SRC manages to do away with the housing allowance, then this was going to be the alternative. And this is a conversation that has always been there between the Parliamentary Service Commission and the SRC, where SRC said, we are not going to give you housing allowance, but we can allow MPs to have night outs when they are in Parliament, because Parliament is based in Nairobi. Not all MPs are members of Parliament from Nairobi County. And the conversation had been that they had selected specific hotels which the MPs will use within the time that they are working in Nairobi. So the safety net was a fallback, that in the event that we are not able to get this housing allowance, which they said if you calculate the 250 is lower than what SRC was offering, which is over 300,000. And the argument has been, why treat MPs differently from the other state officers? Because they have advanced and have said that SRC negotiated a secret pact with ministers, the cabinet secretaries, CS, and the principal secretaries. And it was hammered at State House. We don't know how true that is. And that is why they were saying, we are also state officers. And I remember asking the SRC chair, Ms. Mangich, that why is it that we are discriminating against the MPs? And the same case that they used to base their allocation on was the one for deputy governors. And you secretly wrote a letter to governors to pay deputy governors. So what is the difference between MPs and the deputy governors and the governors who are getting this? But she told me the deputy governors fall in a category that is special. So I've been perusing the constitution to see where deputy governors are special state officers. I haven't seen that. Right. So these are some of the issues that the MPs have been advancing and saying, if we are state officers, why will we be treated differently? And in fact, we are the people who actually consider the budget. We allocate budget. SRC is now a fully sitting commission. It's not part-time like the previous commission. They are getting house allowance. Why will you deny the MPs?
All right. Mark, do you think Kenyans in general and the SRC gets excited when we're talking about members of parliament because they are politicians and it could be fashionable to bash them unnecessarily? Do you think they get unnecessary stick?
Well,
and are treated unfairly?
It is true that when you argue the argument that if CSs and governors get housing allowance, then MPs need to get housing allowance. And that makes sense because you are thinking about it in terms of the general rights. But I want to remind this panel and the viewers at large that if you earn above 100,000 shillings a month, you are in the top 5% of this country. 5%, 3%, I'm corrected. So the top 3% of this country, if you earn just 100,000 shillings a month. So how special do you have to be to earn the near millions that MPs now earn? Okay, so already as we speak, their 800,000 shillings is 8 times more than what the bottom of that 3% can imagine, right? Now, this person earning 20,000 shillings a month who's watching me now on that TV set he saved for 6 months to buy, that person is sitting there and wondering, where is this place you are going to spend a night at 18,000? Because his rent is 5,000. That's where the problem is. You know, stop this mumbo jumbo of SRC constitution. That's nonsense. The question is, where are we as a country? And the problem is, the more we keep insulating our leaders from the realities of Kenyans, the less work they will do for us. Let me put it in perspective. If the Minister of Health does not know what it is to spend a night at Kenyatta Hospital, do you think it's going to change? If the Minister of Transport does not know what it is to have traffic in this country, will they change?
Okay,
if
so here's a question.
MPs are totally insulated from the economic realities of a Kenyan, by giving him transport allowance, seating allowance, everything he does, next there'll be a breathing allowance at this rate.
Right, if we continue,
yes, if we continue like this, our leaders will not be able to address the issues of this country, and that's the germane issue.
Point noted. Okay, let me ask you this: would you rather spend this energy and the rest of Kenyans stripping off the other state officers, the allowances they have, rather than stopping the MPs from getting those allowances?
Actually, that's a better conversation to have, because CSs are state officers. We should know how much they're earning, we should know how much their housing allowance is, and we should also be demanding for it to be reduced, because they went there and they said, we've gone there to serve Kenyans. This idea that working in civil service is an opportunity for you to become wealthy is what is ailing this country.
Wanawakili, educate us.
There are things, there is a notion we need to disabuse from the church. SRC is a constitutional commission. We cannot discuss an increase of even a cent without robbing in SRC. You cannot say it is nonsense. They are there for a reason. There is tremendous wisdom that flowed in that document for us to have that commission. But let us go back to the germane issue, which is discussing the allocation of the money that has been allocated to the members of parliament, the allowances. One, I want to address this issue on 3 grounds, and I think I'll be okay with that. The first ground, as a person who I have worked around members of parliament in terms of doing works with them and working with them on various projects. One, Kenyans have allowed members of parliament, they have pushed members of parliament to economic doldrums, whereby if you go today to a member of parliament who was, let's say, my member of parliament in Turbo constituency, he comes from a place known as Cape Karen. If I were to go today to Honorable Janet's home, I'll find not less than 25 people. What do they want? My wife gave birth last night. Oh, mtoto wangu aliteleza akaanguka. I have a problem of this and that. And they measure leadership in terms of tokenism that we give them. Where do you expect a member of parliament who resigned from being an agricultural officer like my member of parliament and came directly to parliament to get such an amount of money that she can keep bribing 128,000 voters? At times, we need to be reasonable to these members of parliament. Secondly, Kenyans should not demand too much from parliamentarians. Parliamentarians now, there is a burnout. I'm speaking as a person who I know what they are going through.
So what do you blame for that
they have a lot of mortgages.
Lack of civic education that constituents have, and those members of parliament's poor career moves, resigning from jobs into a job where a lot is demanded. So where should the line be drawn?
Where we should draw the line? One,
should we give members of parliament money to give?
There is everybody has a role in this. We have a role as the people in the media, occupying media space, to tell Kenyans one of the roles of members of parliament is not to give you money. Secondly, the counties and the national government have a role. There is a budget for civic education which will go into deepening democracy, because if you do not deepen democracy, people will always suffer from buyer's remorse. That is why we elect a man who sells mitumba. I have nothing against people who sell mitumba, but we want him to question Rotich, who has gone to the best, that institution of finance, what do we call it? IMF. How does it happen? A mitumba man will always be thinking on basics. I bought it at 50, I sold it at 100. That is not how an economy is run. Secondly, there is something that we must also talk to members of parliament. I question their patriotism. They know that our economy is doing bad. We have 890 billion to pay in terms of loans, but they have the audacity to tell us if I come to parliament, I'll be paid. Ben, look at it this way today. If every state officer was to claim that, we have what I call the Chapter 15 commissions. If every Chapter 15 commission was to say, I come from Tigania and I come to work in Nairobi, I sleep here, my office is based here, how will we sustain? But to SRC now, my point is this.
And my question to you is, how much blame does SRC take for this?
The SRC
because it has made Kenyans focus
half of the blame goes to SRC, because when they are striking these secretive deals with deputy governors, PSS and CSS, they do not come out and cry wolf. But when they are dealing with members of parliament, because they know the political backlash, they come out and act holier than thou. Lean Mengich with your commission, get your act together. It is our money we pay members of parliament. We cannot afford to give them CDF. They go and sleep in committees. We pay them to do the job that they have been paid to do. And you come back and tell us they want to sleeping allowance. Sleeping for what? We pay them to go and sit in parliament. They can sleep wherever they choose.
This one.
You see, the crisis we have today is we've got somebody suffering from malaria, and you are attempting to give them a Panadol. You can give them all the Panadol in the world till GSK goes out of production, but they'll not get well. The crisis we have at the National Assembly and the Senate, that the people who are supposed to come up with policies to catalyze our economic growth are sleeping on the job. So it goes back to the voter. I don't know if it's voter's remorse or buyer's remorse. We blame ourselves for electing mediocrity. Then we are not going to have miracles. Even when you come up with a new constitution, perfect. Even if we go to Singapore and South Korea and bring the constitution here, if we've got a horrible human capital in the National Assembly, and the Senate will not make progress. And talking about the wage bill, right. Again, we are not going to address the wage bill by saying that we want to reduce their salaries to the bare minimum by cutting out all the fats. That will not work. If you've got a company which is struggling, you do not reduce the entire workforce and hope to make a profit. You work on your sales. We have a unique opportunity now to ensure that the persons Kipchumba is talking about, who've gone to IMF and World Bank, worked in all those organizations, to make sure that they come up with policies that catalyze our economic growth. So that at the end of the day, however you pay the members of the National Assembly and Senate reduces as a percentage of our GDP. But right now, what are they doing? All of them are all over Tanga and Kieleweke and Embrace and Inua, and nobody is discussing the economic issue. We'll only make progress when we start discussing economics and when we give them solid performance indicators.
All right, Rosalind?
I don't agree with the discussions they are advancing, and also I'm not bidding for MPs.
Right.
But we need to be very honest that any time there is any issue raised against members of parliament, the backlash will always be there. And it will drive interest among Kenyans more than any other state officer. Have we ever asked ourselves the kind of allowances that state officers get? Because you remember the other day SRC was saying we have over 100 allowances. Let's give a scenario. Let's just take a scenario of, let's say, a minister and an MP. Now, if an MP goes out, you're supposed to pay your own meals. If they're in parliament, they signed, yes, it is subsidized, but they pay for it. When you find a minister traveling to a particular event, the transport is offered, entertainment allowance they get, they get the food is paid for, including the people they host. I'll give you a scenario because I cover parliament. You'll find an MP who will show you an SMS in the morning. By morning, 9:30, they have 100 SMSs. If you read the SMSs, my wife gave birth, my child has been sent from school, I don't have any job, and all this electorate believe that this MP they voted for must solve all these issues. Now, an MP gets 625,000 as gross. They are entitled to between 20 and 35 mortgage. They are entitled to 20 million insurance. They are supposed to get a claim mileage allowance if you clock over 375 kilometers. Yes. Right. Now, if you calculate all this and what they are entitled to, and you look at it in terms of a candidate who lost, but is now either a CS or a PS, are we being genuine to these people? Because are we punishing them for the electorate having elected them and denied these other people who are now their bosses?
Good question.
Just
rejoin that
30 seconds. Let's address two issues. Number one, the question is, what is the job of a leader?
Thank you.
You cannot say that you're leading people and they continue doing bad manners and that's what you're leading. No, you cannot say that it is a fault of the people to beg. You've not educated them and you've not done your job. And that takes me back to my argument of public squalor. The problem that we have in this country... If you don't solve
those problems, they vote you out.
So
what about the other state officers who are enjoying the same?
Look at this issue. You've just talked about my wife has given birth. Isn't that the job of the legislature to make sure that there's enough maternity care from government? You say you want burial things. All of those things are within your docket. So the fact that people are coming to ask you for money means that parliament has failed.
Then a quick one. Let me just take an example of a school where everybody can relate with. a high school for that matter. If today you are a principal in a high school and you wake up in the morning and all kids are telling you, mwalimu tunataka banki, will you go back, will you start farming bank in that school? No way. So what we are saying is this, Roslyn Obala, we know you have friendship with members of parliament.
I said I'm
but
not
we are the
for
Kenyans.
I'm just
who
giving
pay
you the
taxes.
scenario of what happens
I'm
there. You
coming
don't
there.
assume.
I'm coming there. We know these things.
All right.
We are saying this in just 1 second. Just because parliamentarians keep people and those tokens and everything, it should not continue. And even as we discuss about civic education to Kenyans, we should start from parliament where we want to
Fair
give them
points,
civic
all of them.
education
Thank you.
of what they should be doing.
All right. It's a conversation that will continue. Kenyans have been reacting very harshly to those allowances, which we understand that have been backdated for members of parliament. There was a supposed fallback plan if that controversial, outrageous, has been called, house allowance does not go through. Let's take a quick commercial